Hey everybody, it's Derek Ruiz, apartment broker and expert, and today's webinar is on Friday, June 26th, and I am super pleased and very, very grateful that the #1 landlord eviction attorney in Los Angeles, Dennis Block, is here to answer some questions and give some insight to what's happening in the multifamily market with COVID and the riots and all the things that the state assembly and government is doing here in California. So Dennis, thank you so much for being here. Let me say a few words about Dennis. Dennis Block law firm started in 1976, and he is the leading eviction law firm in tenant eviction in the state of California. His firm has over 200,000 tenant evictions in California, including a couple for me over the years. And Mr. Block is an authority in the field of landlord tenant law and rent control issues. He conducts numerous seminars for both landlords and fellow attorneys. He is also the past president of the Apartment Association. And Dennis, again, thank you and welcome to the Zoom webinar. I know you'll have some timely information for our multifamily investors, so welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. Appreciate the opportunity and happy to talk to your audience with regard to the pandemic, which obviously not just is affecting the income property owners, but affecting the world. There's not a human on the world that has not been touched by this catastrophic event, which has developed. But our focus, of course, is on income property owners and the effect to them and what we can do to understand what's going up against us and what we can do to alleviate the stress, so to speak. What we have, and I'll start with this because this is really the crux of what's going on, and that is income property owners have been hijacked by our elected officials and even non-elected officials to become, are you ready? Financial institutions. That's what we are now, ladies and gentlemen. We are financial institutions.
What does that mean?
We are forced.
What does that mean, financial?
I'll get to it, my friend.
Okay.
We're financial institutions and we're forced to give interest-free loans. That's what every income property owner is now in the state of California. Let's go over where we are right now, how we got there, and how can we avoid some of this tragedy that is befalling our industry. It started back on March 26th when our wonderful Governor Newsom issued some emergency rules. The first rule that he initiated dealt with the fact that an unlawful detainer, an eviction case, would be slowed down by 60 days if you were going to default the tenant. In other words, giving the tenant an additional 60 days on the property. And based on the pandemic and potential problems of people getting to court. The next thing he did in that same order was he allowed different municipalities and jurisdictions to create their own eviction moratoriums. He gave those jurisdictions the right to create their own eviction moratoriums. And ladies and gentlemen, those local jurisdictions sure stepped up and created their own eviction moratoriums. They basically are all similar. And what these jurisdictions did, from Los Angeles to Santa Monica, to West Hollywood, to Glendale, to Pasadena, to Long Beach, to unincorporated areas of LA County, it really makes no difference. They all stepped up and they all have their own eviction moratorium. And what their ordinances and emergency rules state is that if in fact you have a tenant with an inability to pay rent, then they're due to the pandemic, let me add that phrase in, has to be due to the pandemic, then their rent is deferred. And they are not responsible for paying that rent until such time as the pandemic is declared over. So, for example, in Los Angeles, the city of, if you had a tenant who states that, hey, I lost my job legitimately, he worked in a restaurant, the restaurant was closed, or he worked in a store and the store was closed, I can't pay my rent. So his rent would therefore be deferred, not waived, but deferred. So if he got furloughed or terminated in April, let's pretend, right now, April, May, June's rent, and soon to be July's rent, assuming he had an inability to pay that was related to the pandemic. In that situation, those rents are not due now, they're deferred. Now, different jurisdiction had different time periods as to when this deferred rent was supposed to be paid back. Most of them, the little cities, said about 6 months. You get 6 months to pay it back. A lot of other locations like Los Angeles, Santa Monica, West Hollywood, and unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County, which basically hits almost every other city, gives you 1 year to pay back your rent.
Wow.
So if we're thinking this out logically, if I didn't pay my rent because I was legitimately terminated, I didn't pay it for April, May, June, and July, and let's pretend that they declare the pandemic over on August 1st, well, then I would owe August rent, no question. I got to pay that August rent. But I don't have to pay those other 4 months until August 1st, 2021. August 1st, 2021. Now, Derek, you can kind of see where landlords are really financial institutions that are forced to give interest-free loans. Can we walk over to a bank and say, hey, give me the money? Oh, by the way, I don't have to show any credit worthiness, just give me the money and then I'll pay you back in 1 year. And legitimately, even though we're talking about tenants that legitimately did not have the wherewithal to pay the rent, do you really think the rent's going to get paid back after 6 to 12 months? Do you think the tenants are going to stay around and you're going to chase them if they do move? Do you think the tenants, even if they stay, are going to be there and then you're going to be forced to go forward with an eviction? So this is really what landlords are facing with regard to the local jurisdictions based on the governor's order, which allowed people to pay their rent late, okay? So if you're in this local jurisdiction and if you legitimately have an inability to pay, then your rent is deferred. Not free, but deferred. But in effect, it's really free because no one's going to pay this money back after a year. You know, please send me some postcards if you get your money back after 6 months to 1 year. Now, of course, the law is specific that the reason why you're not paying is because of the pandemic. So you can imagine that the tenants, of course, would have to submit proof that they legitimately got fired. Like, I worked in a hair salon, my bookstore was closed. But you see, in Los Angeles, for example, and unincorporated areas of LA County, you don't have to show any proof. Zero, nothing. All you have to do is say the magic word, COVID-19. If you say those words, the landlord is restrained from going any further. No proof whatsoever. Do you think there'll be a little bit of fraud going on here with many tenants who do have the wherewithal to pay the rent? Because I can tell you abuse case after abuse case after abuse case. I don't got to make this stuff up, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about the abuse case. A pensioner, it's on a pension, Social Security on a pension, never worked. Do I have at least 3 cases right now in my firm where the tenant is claiming COVID-19? Well, yes, there is a pandemic. but it has nothing to do financially with you. Are they still saying that they don't want to pay? Of course they are. Those people we actually filed lawsuits against.
Wait, Dennis, let me just clear that up. So what you're saying is there's somebody a tenant that has a full pension plus a Social Security, so his income stream has not been interrupted, but he's still claiming COVID-19 relief?
Absolutely. I have 3 cases right now being filed. How about the case where the tenant didn't pay rent for November, December, January, and February? And of course, for the rest of the months, March, April, May, and June. But he didn't pay for November, December, January, and February. Those people are claiming COVID. So in those cases, what we do, and we've done a ton of these cases, we serve a 3-day notice for just November, December, January, and February. There's nobody with a straight face that can say that the pandemic affected those months. The pandemic didn't exist. The governor's claiming it started as of March 4th, which would still mean that March's rent would be owed, but even giving that. So we filed a ton of lawsuits dealing with months from February prior in time, because those months didn't. How about the guy who rented a house in Beverly Hills? Rented it in February. What's the rent? $27,500 per month. Second month, COVID.
Ugh.
Second month, COVID. I've got a house on Mulholland Highway that was for sale. And a particular gentleman decided that he would do option money to purchase, put down $300,000. $300,000, and then took a lease for 1 year. The rental payment on the lease is $55,000 a month. The tenant paid the January, which was the initiation, and paid the February, but then claimed COVID-19 come March. Now, the truth of the matter is, he really did lose his source of income. It is true, ladies and gentlemen, because you see, this guy was in the exotic car rental business. And legitimately, his business went down the tubes. So clearly in that situation, he could avail himself of the inability to pay. But the truth is, he has the ability to pay because he showed to the landlord in January that he had $4 million cash in a bank account. $4 million. I submit to you, he lost his income stream. But I also submit to you that he has an ability to pay the rent. That guy is facing an eviction from my firm right now. But we see this over and over again, where I had one tenant tell a client that, you know, I really have the money to pay you, but I have to preserve my own capital. I have to preserve my own capital versus paying the rent. What does that mean? And what does that have to do with the, quote, inability to pay the rent? So we're seeing abuse case after abuse case that has been set up by our wonderful local officials that don't even require proof of COVID. In these cases, we actually did have proof of the fact that they had the ability to pay. So, but for many landlords, as soon as they say COVID-19, then of course the tenant is getting the free-for-all for 1 year deferred rent for LA County and the city of LA. 1 year deferred rent. So really, where can we go with this? Now,
that's what I'm going to find out.
I don't want to say to you that it is not tragic what's happening to tenants. I want everybody to understand that in most cases, though I'm talking about abuse cases, and they're a sizable amount, but in most cases, you know, hey, we're around, we know, you know, real estate brokers lost jobs and income. Everyone did. My firm did, because we can't file every kind of an eviction that I wanted to file. But here's the rub. Why is this the landlord's issue? Why is this on the backs of landlords? You know what we're going to do, Derek, as soon as this broadcast is over? Me and you, because first of all, we have to understand that your housing is a necessity. You can't live out on the streets. Housing is definitely a necessity. And people need a place to live. But I'm going to tell you one other necessity that comes to mind, and that is food. We all need food. In fact, I would think food is a bigger necessity than housing if you're going to put them on equal footing. So as soon as this broadcast is over, Derek, this is what we're going to do. We're going to meet up and we're going to go to the local Ralph's Market, because don't forget, food is a necessity. And what we're going to do is we're going to go in there with our shopping carts. Don't forget your mask. And we're going to fill our carts with food to the brim. And then on the way out, Derek, what we're going to do is we're going to stop by the store manager and we're going to say, hi, food's a necessity. I've lost my job and we'll pay you in 1 year. I'll even give you my address. Do you think we'll get far with that shopping cart?
Not very.
Not very, you're right. And what we're going to be dealing with is a situation where that's a necessity. So I asked the politicians, our elected officials and non-elected officials, why is this on the backs of landlords? If you want to make rent vouchers and pay it to the landlord, that's fine with me. But they're not saying that. It's so simple to say, Mr. Landlord, you're going to be that financial institution making interest-free loans from anywhere from 6 months to 1 year. Where in our Constitution does anybody have the right to come up with this? Now, the city of Los Angeles has been sued by the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. My close friend, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, Garcetti, Mayor Garcetti, is being sued along with the city council because you can't do this.
Right.
You legitimate. This is a taking any way you look at it. And if any of these city councilmen, which were laughing, saying, yeah, we'll call it deferment, we won't call it free rent, because we know that would be immediately thrown out by our Constitution. We'll call it rent deferment. But we know, wink, wink, that no one's ever going to pay this back. This is just going to be a big loss for landlords. One big loss for landlords. But that's where we have. So that lawsuit's proceeding.
Good.
So it's pretty bleak out there for landlords until they finally declare the pandemic to be over, which I'm guessing will be August 1st.
I think it's going to be November 3rd is when it's over, because this is going all the way to the election.
Well, from my mouth to God's ears, but we'll find out together. But the truth is that really things couldn't get worse than the emergency rules that are in place. Or could they? Could things be worse than what I'm already talking about? And the answer, yeah, it's much worse. So let's go back. Let's go back to April 6th, not actually that one, Derek, but April 6th, 2020, and we had the California Judicial Council created emergency rules. Now, the first question for anybody who's listening to this is, what the hell is the Judicial Council? The Judicial Council is appointed by the state Supreme Court. It's governed under the California state constitution. Its function is for the efficient running of our court systems. The efficient running of our court systems, like which judge goes where, what times do courts open up, with regard to court forms. If you've ever seen a court form, it says on the bottom, approved by the Judicial Council. That's for the efficient running of our court system. So they all got together, these non-elected officials, and they just bankrupt our industry. That would be income property owners. So what did they do? They came up with emergency rules. So what are these emergency rules? The emergency rules just relate to unlawful detainers. Unlawful detainers are eviction lawsuits. So under those emergency rules, as promulgated by the Judicial Council, if I file an unlawful detainer, let's pretend it had nothing to do with COVID. It was for rent for December. If I file an unlawful detainer now, just for December's rent, or for that pension person, he didn't lose his source of income, or for the guy with the $4 million in a bank account, and I filed that, and according to the city of Los Angeles, I have every right to file it because it has nothing to do with COVID-19, nothing to do with the pandemic. But if I file that lawsuit, that court is instructed to give me a case number. Great. But the court is also instructed by these emergency rules not to issue a summons. Every lawsuit has a summons. That's what summons people to court. If I don't have a summons, I can't serve the tenant. If I can't serve the tenant while I have a wonderful lawsuit filed, the lawsuit just sits there. Just sits there.
You can't serve the tenant.
You can't serve them. I have a lawsuit. I've got, can I tell you how many I got? I probably have about 600 lawsuits filed that I don't have a summons waiting. Wow. And the Judicial Council says that you can file an eviction lawsuit, but I'm not issuing a summons. They did something else. For those cases that snuck in before the Judicial Council issued their rulings, where I already had a summons and I already served the tenant and I'm ready to take a default, the Judicial Council says I can't take a default to get what they call a judgment and a writ of possession so I can bring it to the sheriff's office. I can't do that. The court is barred from issuing a judgment based on a default in an unlawful detainer, not any other lawsuit. But again, it doesn't matter what the basis of the lawsuit is. If it had to do with extra people or some other thing, they brought a dog in they shouldn't have, or rent that was owed way before the pandemic, I can't file that default. Now, the Judicial Council, under their rules, do have a cutoff time, thank God, when I can finally declare that I can get a summons issued. So when would that be? Logic would say that I can get a summons issued or I can file a default when the pandemic is declared over. That would think the way the Judicial Council would have authored these emergency rules. But that's not the case. So I'll tell you the case, and hopefully everybody's listening to this at this point is sitting down. It's 90 days after the pandemic is declared over.
Wow.
90 days. I can't get a summons based on the April 6th emergency rules by the Judicial Council for the state of California, which is merely an administrative body allowed to do administrative functions. But that's what they did. And now, ladies and gentlemen, what we need to think about is a little bit of math. So let's do some math right now. You have a tenant legitimately didn't pay the rent because he was unable to do so. And of course, that's on the backs of landlords. So he didn't pay for April, May, and June, and July. April, May, June, July. That's 4 months. And according to my scenario, not yours, Derek, my scenario, they're going to open it up on August 1st. So on August 1st, assuming they do, now I can get a 3-day notice for at least for August rent. And if the tenant doesn't pay, well, then I can file an unlawful detainer. But wait a second. I can't get a summons. Even for the August rent, I can't get a summons. So if it's 3 more months, and that's generous, according to you, Derek, August, September, October, I can't get a summons until November. So let's see. We lost 4 months up until July. That's 4. Then we got August, September, October. Well, that's another 3 months. So that's 7 months that I haven't gotten rent because the guy's not paid. If he didn't pay for the last 4, why should he pay for August, September, and October? And by the way, they all know that I can't go forward with the eviction. So now comes the big day, November. I get my summons. I serve the tenant. I'm allowed to go forward with the case. Do you know how long it's going to take? You're going to have tens of thousands of lawsuits filed with the pent-up demand. Do you know how long it's going to take? Normally, an eviction case takes 2 months. This is going to take 6 months minimally for me to finally get a tenant evicted. 6 months from November, you are going to have tenants not paying rent for over 1 year. 1 year based on the efforts of the Judicial Council, based on the mayors of all these cities, 1 year's worth of rent. Now, during this 1 year, do you got to pay your property taxes?
Sure.
Do you have to pay your mortgage payment?
Mm-hmm.
And what if that tenant who hasn't paid rent for a month of Sundays calls you up and say, by the way, my heater went out. Do you have a legal obligation to fix the heater with no rent coming in?
Probably,
Of course you do. If you don't, you're going to get an order to comply from building and safety. And if you don't get the order to comply and comply with that, you could be turned upside down by the city attorney's office. Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. So you have to have this money going out. There's no deferment for real estate taxes, is there? You got to pay all your fees to all these regulatory agencies, like for rent stabilization. You got to pay those. No forgiveness there. So it just keeps going on and on and on, where landlords are going to lose their buildings. Landlords are on small profit margins. They got to make their mortgage payments. And if the institution gives them 3 months to not pay it, it's still, the debt's still there. The tenants are going to run, but the debt's still there. How is the landlord going to make up for this? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to see so many foreclosures, you're not going to care. And this is all on the backs of landlords. Why are we the purveyor for the problems that are engulfing the entire world? Why is that our responsibility? But it is our responsibility because that's where we are. But let's talk about civics. You know, they stopped doing civics in school, so the kids don't know anything about governments and how they work. So but we're a little bit older. We kind of remember how it works. Let's go to how the government works in the state of California. There's 2 ways that laws can be enacted. And that is, if it's an emergency period, the governor, under our Constitution, has the right to enact laws. The other way is by our state legislature, through our state assembly and our state senate. They have to vote laws in between the 2 houses, and then they deliver it to the governor to sign. If he doesn't sign it, then they got to do a veto override, which would need at least 2/3 of those bodies to vote for it. Well, that's how laws are enacted. Well, who the hell is the Judicial Council? That's an administrative body. Did they create laws? Well, they sure did. You can look this up after the telecast, but there's a code section, Code of Civil Procedure 1166, subsection E. That code section says, if I file an unlawful detainer, you're damn required to issue a summons. That's what the code says. How did the Judicial Council create a law that says, no, I'm not issuing a summons? Did they just create their own law? There's also another code section, Code of Civil Procedure 1169. It says, if I file a default, you got to give me an immediate writ of possession that I could take to the sheriff's office. Did they just change that law? Where did they have the authority to change the law? And the answer is simple. They didn't. And that's why I filed a lawsuit against the Judicial Council. That lawsuit right now is in the appellate department of the Superior Court. If anybody wants to read about it, they can go to my website, which is behind my right shoulder, and it's evict123.com. That's EVICT 123.com. And if you, on the homepage in the top left corner, there's a button that says Protect Our Property Rights. You can read all about the lawsuit that I filed. I actually have all of the pleadings We are asking for some donations, but whether you donate or not, we're still going forward with this. I should have an initial ruling on it within the next week to 10 days. Though if it doesn't go our way, we're taking it to the Court of Appeals, and I'll also take it to the California Supreme Court. The Judicial Council did not have the authority to do so. So ladies and gentlemen, hopefully if I am successful, every landlord in the state of California will inure to their benefit with regard to this. So I've said during this Zoom meeting that I have filed at least 600 lawsuits. So why am I filing lawsuits? If I can't get a summons, what's the point? Well, I'll tell you what the point is. What we do is, for these lawsuits are all filed that, in our opinion, are not COVID related. The tenant said nothing to me. I asked him, wouldn't say a word. He's got to at least say something, even if he doesn't have to show proof. He's got to at least mouth the words COVID-19, say something, coronavirus. But if he doesn't say anything, and by the way, you see him going to work every single day, so you know it's just garbage. So we filed lawsuits and all those. Now, why would I do that? I did that for two reasons. Number one is I'll get a case number and the tenant sued. Whether I serve him or not, the tenant sued. So then what we do is we'll send a copy of the lawsuit to the tenant. It's not a formal service. And we send it with a letter. The letter says, hey, you're sued. There is no such thing as rent forgiveness. You are going to be the subject of this unlawful detainer, which will muddy your credit and make sure that you're on a list where other landlords will be able to view it. So it would be in your best interest, Mr. Tenant, to settle up with your landlord now. Settlements can be, get your ass off the property now. Settlements can be that, okay, Mr. Landlord, I did have some problems, but I'll start paying some of the rent back to you now. So at least landlords don't have to wait 6 months to 1 year. Or maybe the landlord wants to come up with a plan that, I'll tell you what, pay me 80% of the rent now, and I'll forgive 20%. That's up to the landlord. Quite frankly, that's a better deal than waiting 1 year for your rent when the guy's probably going to be in another state and you're never going to see the person again.
Yep.
So in that situation, by sending this, we've had some great success by tenants realizing that they are sued, that there's no going back, and let's make peace with the landlord. But of course, you're going to have a certain percentage of tenants that do absolutely nothing. I don't care. They know they can't get evicted. They're just ignoring the inevitable and just moving on. However, in those cases, we gain a dramatic advantage because in those cases, you see, I've filed lawsuits in April, May, and June. When I file a lawsuit, I have a case number. My case number is going to be lower than any other case number issued. And in courts, what gets priority is the lower case number. Whoever filed first goes first. Right. So in that situation, we're going to be able to move forward with our cases faster than anybody else. So it's not going to be the typical 6-month wait with regard to our cases. So that's the advantage. Now, for the tenants that are truly COVID related, or at least have told you so you're feeling intimidated about filing lawsuits, we've been writing letters to those tenants where we'll tell the tenants, hey, this is your responsibility. Number one, there is no rent forgiveness. You owe this rent and we're coming after you one way or the other. That if this is not an inability to pay, you better pay us now. If it is an inability to pay, I suggest strongly that you make a deal with your landlord, because there's going to come a day when this rent is owed. And if you don't have the money now, can you imagine paying 4 months rent? Even if it's in 1 year, you're going to owe that 4 months rent, and you are going to be the subject of an eviction. You had to pay all your rent once the pandemic is over, but as to the deferred rent, you had to pay it in that 1 year period, all on that same day. You better make arrangements now, because otherwise you're either no longer going to be in the building because you evicted, or you will be the subject of this eviction lawsuit. So letters have been very helpful, writing to those tenants that are legitimately affected by them. So our strategy number one is that if it is COVID related, let's write a letter. If it's not COVID related, file your damn lawsuit right now. Let's get in front of everybody else. There's going to be thousands and thousands of landlords who will be filing. Trust me, I'm sure my phone will be ringing off the hook, as it is now, with hardly anything to do. And also keep your fingers crossed with regard to not only the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles against our wonderful mayor, Garcetti, but also my lawsuit, which is against the Judicial Council, to have that wiped out so that we can start moving forward with all the lawsuits that I've already filed. So that's my presentation, Derek. I don't know which Ralph's Market you want to go to after our tete-a-tete here there. But if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Absolutely. No, that was great. That really, people need this information. And I'm so glad you're filing a suit against the Judicial Council?
Council, correct.
Okay, that's awesome. So I'll definitely post a link to the lawsuit in this after this is done. In addition to our local elected politicians now throwing riots and throwing state assembly with all these cockamamie bills, can you discuss AB 828, Phil Ting, assembly member in San Francisco's proposed bill?
I think that one was one where they wanted to try to reduce rent by 25%. Yeah. That one's already been voted out of committee, so we got past that one.
Oh, really? Oh, I can't.
That was a crazy one where a landlord, even in an uncontested case, would have to have a hearing in front of a judge to justify that the rent that they're charging is proper. And if the judge found that it wasn't, like the judge is a real estate appraisal,
right?
Individual, then they could reduce the rent. So Ting is definitely, I would call him a dingbat at best, and drinking Kool-Aid, quite frankly.
Yeah,
that was voted out.
Thank God. I was shocked when I saw that bill, and I was like, oh my God, another body blow to apartment owners. I mean, it's crazy. And I think there was another bill that just got postponed or voted down. I can't remember the number. That was the vacancy tax bill. Can you explain that?
Yes. Well, landlords are so reticent based on these laws to even lease their buildings out that the city wanted to impose a tax if you had a vacant unit. Well, what if legitimately you have a vacant unit because you're planning on moving in? Or what if legitimately you have a vacant unit because you can't rent it out? So they're going to put pressure on landlords to take less rent. Again, this is totally unconstitutional. And they just can't figure enough ways to break people's backs who happen to be landlords. You know, the whole concept of rent control is insanity. You know, you guys are real estate brokers, or you deal with property management. Is there any person who sells goods or services in our country that is told what they can charge for them?
Yeah.
Any group? You know, if you're a gardener and you want to charge $5,000 per month for your lawn service, you certainly have the right to do it. You're a doctor serving the community. You can charge what you want. Anybody can charge what they want unless your name is landlord.
I know.
So all of these laws are insane, and they just keep coming after our industry. So we need to fight back. When they were talking about statewide rent control, and they were just instituting, which of course got instituted on January 1st of this year. In that situation, I was giving lectures up and down the coast of California, telling landlords, serve a 60-day notice to your tenant now. Do it now, and so it'll expire before January 1st. And if you do, this way you'll be able to rid yourself of this tenant. You couldn't raise the rent at that point. It would have been rolled back, but you could evict. So serve that 60-day notice and proceed forward. Well, I got so much flack from our industry, from the California Apartment Association, even from, I'm sorry to say, from the California, from Greater Los Angeles, Los Angeles City, Greater Los Angeles. They were saying, what are you doing? You're giving our industry a black eye, and we're going to be taking the brunt of this. Well, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter. They're coming after our industries, whether we act like nice guys, bad guys, or indifferent guys. We need to stand on every right that we have and use our court systems in terms of constitutional challenges. because there is no politician that is on our side. Let me repeat, there is no politician, elected or non-elected official, that is on our side. We go into courts on a daily basis, and we have to jump through so many hoops. There are, in every unlawful detainer action, there's maybe 30 or 40 what we call gotchas. If you made this mistake, the guy could owe you $1,000 million worth of rent. It makes no difference. If you've had a situation where you made one procedural mistake, they throw you out of court, and they're so happy to do it. It has nothing to do with fairness. So we have to stand on every single right we can, because there is no one on our side, from our elected officials, non-elected officials, and certainly the judges in our court systems.
Dennis, here's a question. Here's a situation that I'm currently going through right now. I have an 8-unit apartment building in Silver Lake that I have in escrow for my seller client. He's got 4 tenants that are in arrears because of COVID-19 or whatever. So when that property closes escrow and those debts are still there, does that debt transfer to the new buyer, or what do we need to do to protect ourselves? Because the buyer wants to make sure that it's documented that, hey, these tenants owe back rent even though I'm buying the property.
The debt would be owed by the person, is owed to the person who currently owns the property. So if you sold the property, for example, come July 1st, all the rent owed would be owed to the prior landlord, the seller of the property. Now, the seller can, of course, assign his debt to the buyer of the property, to the new owner, and then that would then befall upon the tenants to pay the new owner. But if you close escrow, then the landlord does have the right to seek that. The seller does have the right to seek that in 1 year.
How do we assign the debt?
It's just a simple assignment. So it's just a 1-page piece of paper that says, I am the seller of the property. I hereby assign all the rent owed from this unit to the purchaser.
Beautiful. That's exactly what I needed to know, because like I said, I'm in that situation right now. What do you think, what specific advice would you give apartment owners right now that, let's say their building's okay, maybe they got 1 or 2 tenants not paying? Is there any proactive things they should be doing other than filing these lawsuits to protect themselves?
Well, again, if it's COVID related, they can't file the lawsuit. In fact, the city of Los Angeles passed another law. What did that law say? It said that if you know your tenant is not paying and it's COVID related, then you're guilty. And your tenant can now sue you for up to $10,000 plus attorney's fees. So we don't want to be filing. It's unbelievable. More protection for tenants. That's what they need, without any proof to show you that it's really COVID related. So we don't want to file any lawsuits unless you know for sure that it's not COVID related, like all rent owed up to February, or where you know the guy's working, or the guy never worked. He never worked. So therefore, he's not affected by the pandemic. So you want to file those. The other ones, all we can do is write letters. And I do have an effective letter that I've been sending to tenants, which has really been working reasonably well.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's great advice. So basically what we're saying is, if you have COVID-related non-paying tenants, there's a certain letter you want to send them. If you have non-COVID-related non-paying tenants, then there's another strategy, which sounds like starting the lawsuit. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Well, I really appreciate your time today. You've been a wealth of information, and I really have been wanting to talk to you and record this and get this out to all the apartment owners that I know, because this is vital information. And so again, what services can you provide people that are watching this webinar right now specifically?
Well, if anybody does have a question, our law firm is unusual that you can call our office, whether you're an attorney or not, whether you're a client or not. And we're happy to have an attorney get on the phone, including me. I'm on the phone all day long. And we'll answer your questions, whether it's COVID related or just, a tenant that's just throwing garbage out the back window and what you can do with that. So we'll deal with phone calls if clients want to call in, or potential clients want to call and ask a question. There is no charge. Again, we'll evaluate your case for you. If in fact we can write a letter for you, that's great. If we can file a lawsuit now, or of course, once the pandemic is declared over, and I'm praying, Derek, that it's August 1st, that we'll then be able to proceed forward with lawsuits on that. So once again, my phone number behind my right shoulder there is 1-800-77-EVICT, that's EVICT, or you can read my website, which is evict123.com. Again, in the top left corner, it says something to the effect of protect our industry. You can click on that and learn all about our lawsuit. And if you want to donate some money, I'd appreciate that as well.
One more plug for your website. You offer free landlord forms, which
Yes.
I find extremely helpful whenever I need to post a notice to enter or create a lease. Sometimes I use a card form, but if one of my clients says, Derek, do you have a lease? Go to evict123.com, Dennis Block, download the lease and all the other addendums you need to successfully create a lease for a new tenant. So that is really valuable. And let me tell you, apartment owners, you want to have Dennis Block's number on speed dial on your cell phone because you will need him at some point. Dennis, thank you so much. I can't wait to get this out to all of my investor clients and people that own multifamily property, because I know it's going to be very valuable information for them. So thank you very much and look forward to talking to you soon.
You take care. Thank you.
All right. All right, everybody. This is Derek Ruiz, apartment broker and expert. Thanks for watching.